Welcome back to Lee Too Deep channel. Is there any conspiracy other than John in Too Deep's disappearance? Will James find Too Deep, and is the story of Too Deep being pregnant with John true? Let's find the answer in this next story. The ancient forest stood still under a blanket of night, silent and solemn as if it held secrets too heavy for the world to bear. Not even moonlight could pierce the thick canopy above. Only the faint whispers of wind through the trees and the soft chorus of insects disturbed the silence. Deep within the heart of this forgotten wilderness lay an old, decaying wooden house. It seemed abandoned, but inside, a life clung desperately to hope. Deep lay curled on the cold wooden floor, her body frail, her skin pale, her hair tangled from days of captivity. Her eyes were hollow from exhaustion and fear. Yet in her hand she clutched something precious, a silver ring James had given her on their anniversary. That ring was no longer just a symbol of love, it was her last link to the outside world, to life, to him. She didn't know how much longer she could survive. But one thing kept her heart beating, the belief that James was out there, searching for her. With what little strength remained, she took a bold risk. During a moment when her captors delivered food, she secretly pried the small gemstone from the ring and folded a slip of paper inside. Coordinates. The exact location of the place where she was held. She resealed the ring and placed it near a dusty window where a sliver of light fell. It was an act of pure faith. The final message from a girl who refused to let fear win. Elsewhere, James had become a shadow of himself. Since the day Deep vanished, his world had collapsed. Sleep eluded him. Food lost all taste. He spent his days chasing leads, combing every trail, every memory, every place they had ever been together. Time blurred. Grief was a constant weight on his chest. But he never gave up. He couldn't. Because love, to him, meant never stopping the search. Then, one day, fate intervened. Returning to a forgotten trail they once hiked, James stumbled upon something glinting beneath the leaves, the ring. The gemstone was gone, but it was hers. He knew it instantly. Something was hidden inside. He was sure of it. He raced to a lab, hands trembling. When the small note was extracted from the hollow of the ring, James didn't hesitate. He plunged into the forest that very night. The house emerged from the shadows like a ghost. Vines crept up its broken walls, and rot clung to every wooden beam. James didn't knock. He kicked the rusted chain off the door, bursting into the darkness like a storm. And there, he saw her. Deep lay there, barely conscious, but alive. He dropped to his knees, gathered her in his arms, and whispered in a voice thick with pain, "I'm so sorry. I'm too late." But Deep's eyes fluttered open, and a faint smile touched her lips. "As long as you kept looking, I would still be alive." Tears filled his eyes. He held her tighter, as though afraid she would vanish like a dream. That fragile moment of reunion was shattered by a chilling voice from the shadows. Tran stood in the doorway, her eyes no longer warm with longing but burning with rage. For 10 years, she had loved James in silence. She had watched, waited, and convinced herself that one day, he would turn to her. But Deep's presence had ruined everything. Tran had carefully orchestrated her plan, thinking she could make James love her if only Deep were out of the picture. But now, seeing them embrace, her fury exploded. "I waited 10 years for you, James. 10 years," she screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of repressed heartbreak. "If I can't have you, no one will." James stood protectively in front of Deep, his voice slow but steady. "Love is never an excuse to harm others. It never will be." Tran's expression twisted into something broken, half madness, half sorrow. She fled into the night. But her obsession had only just begun. In the days that followed, anonymous letters, rumors, and threats crept into James and Deep's lives like poison. Tran was trying to break them apart from the shadows. But instead of tearing them down, the storm only strengthened them. With each challenge, James and Deep clung tighter to one another. Their love became armor, forged in fire, resilient beyond fear. Then one night, a message arrived. There was no text, only a single symbol. The same snowflake James had once engraved on Deep's ring. It was Tran's call to battle. Her final attempt to end it all. They didn't run. They returned to the house in the forest, hand in hand. Inside, Tran was waiting. Her eyes brimmed with fury and despair. A woman on the edge of destruction. This time, I will win, she said, her voice trembling. James looked at her, sadness in his gaze. This ends now, Tran. Not with hate, not with fear, but with truth. Tran's facade cracked. The lies, the years of delusion, came crumbling down. She wept. But it was too late. When the authorities arrived, she was no longer resisting. She was taken away, not for punishment, but for treatment. A soul lost in its own torment. As dawn broke over the forest, James held Deep in his arms. They stood beneath the trees, where once darkness had ruled, now bathed in golden light. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. As long as you were looking for me, she whispered, I knew I wasn't lost. He kissed her forehead. And I always will. Even through the darkest woods. They left the forest behind, not as survivors, but as two people who had proven that true love isn't just a feeling, it's a fight. A promise. A light in the night that never goes out. Because love, when it is real, is not just passion. It is courage. It is sacrifice. And above all, it is never giving up.